My name is Max Bamfield. Welcome to my talk. Today I'll be discussing the research I did in relation to two vaguely related areas. One is chronic fatigue and activity. The other is how and why I invented the desk. So it'll be of interest to office workers. This is research papers from one of my filing cabinets, and this is a research paper from 1976. I started because nobody in the world knew how to treat the illnesses, and I decided I didn't want to wait for other people to do it, so I do the research myself. This is from another file in another cupboard. Oh, sorry. This is the first posture theory that I wrote. It was in 1980, and the basic thing is that sitting at a desk compresses everything in the chest and abdomen and can cause a range of health problems, as you can see there. And this is some research papers from this particular folder. And this folder is also from that same another section of that cabinet. And this is a research or letter from Tim Morrell. He was the head of the Adelaide University Medical School, and he was also the head of the Department of Community Medicine, and he formerly did research into the pig bell virus in New Guinea, and I was referred to him by Tony Sedgwick, the head of the South Australian Institute for Fitness Research and Training, because the research cardiologists there were not keen on doing the project that I wanted done. So he put me in charge. And the fact that I didn't have medical qualifications meant I had to put together a committee of doctors who would therefore fill the requirements for government funding. It has to be endorsed by doctors before they'll do anything. And it was Tim Morrell's role to provide me with a list of doctors who might be interested in joining that committee, and that was successful. I found one doctor who would do that, and there were others. And this is a research grant provided by a politician for a project I was doing after I'd satisfied all the requirements for research projects in terms of the people involved. This is a letter from a medical museum in London. I wanted to know if they could provide me with a photo of a particular portrait, and the reply was that it hadn't been in their museum for 15 years. I eventually found a way of doing it later. So this is some of those research papers. It's out of that particular cabinet. Now, this is from another cupboard, and this is the research paper I submitted for publication. It wasn't accepted by anybody, but until about 40 years later. But it was initially about 15 or 16 pages long. I had to abbreviate it for the journals. I didn't think they'd publish a 16-page research paper. And this is a graph I did, and you can see the graph paper there. I think I initially did it on graph paper there. And you can see that's probably another reason why it wasn't published. I just drew it with pencils and graph paper. I think they were after something a bit more professional. So, and this is perhaps the other papers related to it, and so forth. And that's the sort of thing that was involved, those sorts of data collections. And that's one of the folders in relation to that research project. It was basically chronic fatigue and exercise, still controversial, but everyone uses that method now. And they think that all I did was run slowly or something. It's a little bit more complicated than that. So now, in another cupboard out in another room, a filing cabinet, I have under the letter D Da Costa syndrome's original research paper from 1871. It's a 37-page research paper, got a lot of useful clues in it about things like chronic fatigue. Now this, there weren't enough clues in the modern literature. You see, nobody knew anything about these things. They couldn't treat it, couldn't cure it, nothing was effective. And so I needed to go through history to look for more clues. And I've got a few folders. A lot of them are from the history of medicine, where I was looking for clues from anywhere in the modern literature, in the old literature, and personal experience, and of course outside in the general community. Now, about 30 years later, in 2013, 2014, I'd been doing research through this period. I invented the standing desk in 1998, but because of a lot of experience. But 30 years later, in 2014, all along the way I've been doing this research, right? I was prompted to send essays to the British Medical Journal. And so I summarised a lot of the things that I was doing, not a lot of details, but a lot of things I was doing I summarised in 40 essays between 2013 and 2016. This is something they published on my an introduction to my research paper of 2014, of 1982 to 84. That's the one I showed you. It's now in the British Medical Journal. I showed you the draft that I wrote into 1984 or something. Now, this is an actual printout of that draft in the British Medical Journal. I presented it as an attachment, and this is one of the graphs that I showed you. This is another graph. I actually paid an artist to draw that graph professionally before I sent it to the BMJ. Now, this is the British Medical Journal inviting me to join their peer review team in relation to areas of my expertise, but I haven't taken that up for various reasons. This is another article I put in Standing Desk to sort of indicate that I'm the guy who invented it and why. There's another one, there's a couple more here on the posture theory, the origin of exercising within limits, etc. There's one on the biomechanics of sitting and writing, and there's one on Banfield's principles for exercise diagnosis, measurement, treatment, and so forth. So there's quite a few real research papers here on. This is the one on the posture theory from 1980, and a lot of the things that I discovered that really nobody else knew until I discovered them. So now at this stage, I'm standing in front of the world's first standing computer desk as I speak. These files are on a lectern because I can't put them on a chair, it wouldn't be high enough. And this is the world's first standing computer desk. The reason it took so long is because when I worked out that sitting at a desk was to cause health problems in some people in 1980, I started sitting up straight. But it didn't really help, and I started up standing up, and it didn't help either. And it did in a way, but it was pretty clumsy way of doing things and wasn't practical. So over the years, I'd add 6-inch high platform to the desk, and then a few years ago by another, this isn't helping, I'll add another 6-inch high platform. I didn't know I'd ever solve all these problems with a desk, but I just got a little bit more relief and from pain and so forth. And so I had angled platforms, and I had high platforms, and I had flat benches, and I did all sorts of things. I had all sorts of distances away from me. It didn't work. But one day, I noticed I was free of pain. And I thought, what have I done? And then I wrote down the specifications of the height, distances, dimensions, and all sorts of things about where the keyboard was, where the screen was. And that, my friends, is the origin of the standing computer desk. I knew I'd solved a major problem that had never been solved before. And when I was doing this research, I went to buildings all over Adelaide and universities and all sorts of things. I never ever in my whole life saw a standing desk anywhere. Well, since I invented that desk, they're everywhere. It's a $6.9 billion a year industry. So they're in every building. They're in universities, they're in hospitals, they're in medical clinics, they're in government departments, they're in libraries, they're in schools, they're everywhere. They didn't exist before. And people said they had them 50, 100 years ago. Well, they were so poorly designed, nobody wanted them. They didn't sell. They were collecting dust if they were anywhere. This is the one that furniture companies are now manufacturing based on this principle. And so what I want to conclude with at this stage is this. Why do some people think that my research was easy? Why do they think they could have done it? And the second thing is, why do teams of international experts want you to believe that they did the research? Well, I'd like you to think about that. So I've just shown you a sort of brief example of the type of research I did. I'm the guy who solved the problems. Thank you for listening. Tell your friends. Thank you for watching. As an addendum, I'd also like to mention that at one stage I had 300 medical books in another room. I sold them about 10 years ago because at that stage no one was showing me any interest. And I was still acting as if they were sceptical of the value of my ideas. So I sold half of them. One of the books, or set of books, was a 12-volume set of books by Lord Horder, the British Encyclopedia of Medical Practice. And Lord Horder was the Queen of England's personal physician at that time. I also have this book, and it's Paul Wood's. Paul Wood was Britain's top researcher in the 1940s and 50s, and his opinion influenced the world for 20 years. And he was of the opinion that problems with chronic fatigue, etc., were related to were psychiatric disorders. And he observed, or he noted, that this is the physique of the typical patient, basically stooped and thin. Now, you may not notice it, but I matched that. And when I saw that, I thought, that's not a coincidence. Well, he thought it might have been, but he did suggest various methods that some of the symptoms could be caused. For instance, he thought that the chest pain would be caused by compression of the ribs by rapid breathing or abnormal breathing. I knew that wasn't the case. He also noted that the chest pain could be relieved by analgesics in the right place. Well, I knew that's guaranteed proof that this is a physical problem. And he thought the chest pain could be caused by cranking engines, etc. And the posture, of course. But he didn't understand how posture could do it. He just saw it as a possibility. But what he concluded, well, it's a psychiatric disorder. And what he said there is that it's in the chapter on psychiatric disorders. What he said here is this. These problems, these patients were timid children, far too dependent upon maternal protection. At school, kindly doctors and soft mothers protected them from the hazards of football, swimming and the gymnasium. Well, this is me when I was 17 years old. I played sport every day of the week when I was a teenager. And this is a front somersault from a 10-foot high unicycle. No one else in the gym would do it. So 2 years after that, I was never afraid of sport, bloody gymnastics. When you're a kid, that's entertainment, that's fun. You don't want to watch TV, you want to go out and do something like that. Of course you risk injury, that's the name of the game. In gymnastics, you see the Olympics, the way they bloody jump over vaulting horses and land in the wrong way. Well, that's just the way it goes. For some reason, you manage to recover from most things. So, but 2 years later, I was offered 3 scholarships to study leadership in gymnastics in a course called Group Work at the Institute of Technology. And one of the committees that offered me a scholarship was the National Fitness Council of Australia, who are associated with the Australian Olympic Committee. So I knew these ideas about the shyness and timidity and fear of gymnastics and sport were way off the mark. That certainly wasn't the case, and therefore, I had to keep on doing research because I had to find the real cause of these things. So I went on, and that later, when I got involved in research, 7 years later, when the research cardiologists weren't interested in doing this project on chronic fatigue and exercise, I was about to get up and leave the office, leave the meeting, and then the head of the institute, Tony, said, why don't you do it yourself? So he put me in charge. And so I was the person who designed the program, did the research, and the other people in the committee provided the data that I needed to scientifically assess it and confirm what I was saying. So bear that in mind.